Hey guys, welcome back to Vertical Momentum. I'm your host, Richard Kaufman, also known as the Comeback Coach. Obviously, I'm not alone today. I have these two young ladies that are going to be talking to us about what Afghanistan is really like. What is it like growing up there, and what they're doing now. So, guys, and this is Women's History Month. That's why I wanted to have you guys on. So, I just want to say thank you so much for coming on, Madison. You're awesome. Thank you for putting us all together. So my first question is, what is your definition of resilience? Malaine, we'll go together. We'll go with you first, and then Sola will go with you next. So what is your definition of resiliency?
Well, first, thank you so much for having us. I think the most basic definition is just your ability to get through the hard times in life and the obstacles that people throw at you. But I also think it has to do with, throughout that process, maintaining a sense of self and purpose and individuality. And I think that's something we talk a lot about in this book, Defiant Dreams, and obviously Sola's incredible life story. So hopefully we'll get into that more.
Yep. So Sola, obviously, what is your definition? Because the reason why I asked you young ladies this question is because, we have it so good in this country, and we don't realize how good we have it. And I know how good we have it. But, you guys growing up, it wasn't all unicorns, sprinkles, and rainbows. You guys had some struggles in life. So, Sola, what is your definition of resiliency?
I think for me, it's not giving up. And so because it comes really for me is back like from my own family and in Afghanistan, though it is like it has a rich past, but in the recent 4 decades, that's not really the case. So I have seen my family going through civil war and like seeing all their life, everything that they have built destroyed, and then they had to rebuild everything from scratch. And so every time when I was learning or things like that, I would look at if they could go through all of that, I can still do. So I think just not giving up, and also not sometimes, even though it's really hard to give up on hope, but I think not giving up on hope. And even the time that things might seem very, very dark, but still try to find the light or try to strive for the light.
Okay, now I got to know, first question is, how did you guys connect? How did you guys get together in the first place?
Sure. So in Defiant Dreams, our book is Sola's incredible life story about growing up in Afghanistan and secretly educating herself and escaping the country. And I grew up in the United States, but we were actually first connected during the pandemic when I was about to start my undergrad at Stanford. But of course, the world was kind of turned upside down. And so Sola and I happened to be connected, and she started telling me stories from her life, and I started writing them, and that became the basis for this book, Defiant Dreams. And so that's how we first connected. But then after a year, we were able to finally meet in person. And I think we really had this unspoken connection because we were very similar in many ways, and we also had similar cultural backgrounds, and we were really able to connect over that. And I feel fortunate that we really built a friendship out of this process. We started as collaborators on a book, but you can't tell someone the personal details of your life in a vacuum, right? So we had to build that relationship, and now we've known each other for 3 or 4 years. So it's been an amazing process.
Okay, so now just give us a little background on each of you, and then we can go into it. So you start with Malaina first, and then we'll go to Sola. So give us a little bit of background, where you come from, where did you grow up, and some of the hardships that you've grown up
with. If you want me to start, and then I know we'll get into Sola's story, which is what the book is about.
This way we'll go back and forth.
Okay. Sounds good. Well, I was born in the San Francisco Bay Area, so and then now I'm a student at Stanford, so I've been here all my life. But I think I really connected to Sola's story because my family is Indian American. And I felt in many ways the stories that she told me about her family and her upbringing held a lot of resonance with the stories that I heard from my grandparents' generation. And I grew up around stories about how women could be denied education or denied freedoms or denied rights just because of their gender. And it was something that I felt very personally and saw happen to members of my own family. Obviously, the situation in Afghanistan is much worse, and it's happened far more recently. You know, for many decades, Afghanistan has been the worst country in the world to be a woman. But I think it was that background and that family experience that really allowed me to connect to the story. And then also, you know, so much of my family has come to the United States in pursuit of education and seen how transformative education can be. And that was another real connector for us, I think.
Okay, so let's talk about, because my best friend, he's from India, and he taught me how to be a businessman. And the thing that he taught me is education is so important, especially in a lot of countries from Asia and Europe, that a lot of people here in America, we take a phone for granted. We take YouTube or Audible for granted, and then there's some countries like Afghanistan where that'd be a luxury. That would be like the greatest thing if you can get a hold of a phone to be able to learn. So I just want to say, I appreciate that. You're going through, where your families come from, and you're making them proud. And Stanford's a pretty nice school, I gotta say. I love Stanford. I love their sports program. I actually follow all their sports programs. So I think you're going to kick ass and take names at Stanford. So
thank you.
So talk to us about, we're going to get into your story now. Tell us about you, what it was like growing up there, because I'm a veteran. I spent 23 years in the military. So we know one part of Afghanistan. We know the military, we know all that, but we really don't know what it's like behind closed doors as a young female, and as growing up as a young girl to a woman. So what is Afghanistan really like for the common people?
Yeah, so I think again, like Afghanistan, like it can't be like a one-time definition. It has gone through so much transformation in the 50s when my grandfather, at that time Afghanistan was going through this modernization process of schools opening, universities opening, and my mom was from that generation when Afghanistan really created a new identity for itself. Women were allowed to wear whatever they wanted to wear, and they were going to schools, universities. My own aunts from both my father's side and mother's sides, they went to study in Russia, and so the atmosphere was completely different, And then but at the same time there was some resistance, but then like the Soviet invaded, and then there's resistance to there was like start fighting happen, and then led that eventually become a civil war. And then like from that civil war, Taliban emerged, and that completely, both the civil war and Taliban completely destroyed the very fabric of Afghan society, and whatever that was created, that was built, was destroyed for both women and men. So everything that was good was destroyed. And then the schools where women were not allowed to go to school. And my mom was a professor at Kabul University, and then she had to she lost everything. And like everyone else, she was just at home. And so I was born in 1996 when Taliban first took over Afghanistan like fully. And, they were not like, I remember like for a long time, I didn't have a doll because the Taliban banned doll. And it's only when one time my mom was like, she smuggled one from Pakistan, and even that I didn't have to, like, I was only allowed to play it with it like inside the house. So that was my childhood. And then in 2001, the Taliban, the US came, and like the Taliban were ousted, and so really this like new era for Afghanistan started. And that's we start going to school again. Not like this was our first time starting going to school, but like for my mother, she had like so much hope for this generation of her kids because of civil war and then the Taliban. Like her older generation of the kids were not allowed to go to school, and they didn't go to school, and but that also came to an abrupt end in for me and my sister in 2000, around 2006 and 7. Taliban were making it's come back and so like a group of men came to our door and threatened us if I continued to going to school. And so from that day on, I stopped going to school, and like the restrictions as I started to grow up only continued to increase. And I left home only a couple of times a year, and whenever I did, I had to wear this suffocating burqa that covered me from head to toe. But meanwhile, my brothers were going to school, so there was this interesting dynamics of both progress happening and at the same time, Taliban insurgency becoming stronger and stronger. And so that's one part of it.
Okay, like now I have some questions because you were born in 1996, so you were still only, a child when 9/11 happened,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm sure that wasn't easy to to start having freedom and then being locked down again. And so, how was that? I mean, I'm sure you don't remember a lot of it, but I'm sure, like one day you're out playing soccer and having fun, and the next day, people were dropping bombs, and all of a sudden your whole life changes in an instant. So, if you could remember back, what was that like, and what were your parents like? What was their thought process when this was all happening?
So I was, of course, very young to understand, but I remember like when I was, so we left, when the war started after 9/11, we went to Pakistan. That's because the safety place. And when we come, like, I see that time from the lens of my childhood innocence. So when we come back, we had our TV, my father brought a TV with him. And so just I remember those times like, oh, we can suddenly watch a TV. And so of course, like now I know the history and the complexity of the whole situation. It wasn't like, oh, great, like, okay, freedom and da da da. There was so much. Afghanistan went through civil war, and that's all was still there. So there was so much, but like as a feeling, the feelings that I remember was, oh, we can watch TV now. There are parks, and there was suddenly like this world that opened up that was not there before.
Okay, so now also, 'cause as you see, I'm writing things down as we talk because I don't want to miss anything. I'm so grateful that we get the chance to chat. So I just want to say thank you so much. So, do you think you were at an advantage to a lot of other children because your mother was a professor? So, even though you weren't going to school, you were still getting an education at home. Do you feel you were at an advantage?
Definitely, I think we're hugely shaped by our families, and for me, like my father was all educated, and like I know the stories of my mother, the way she was telling me, like, oh, she would. So I think that adds so much to your imagination, like what is possible for a woman, and I think that in itself, but that's in itself is a big advantage of like women who don't like girls who don't know like what's like what a woman can do. And if you're in a society that gone through so much transformation, and it's also kind of patriarchal as well. I mean, the whole world is patriarchal, and so it is you if you just listen to what society tells you, you're not gonna your imagination is not gonna be like, oh, I can be this, I can be that. So of course I think just for the kind of family I was, that adds so much to my advantage.
Yeah, I think just to add, a real central theme of this book is the fact that Sola had to overcome so many obstacles using dial-up internet in the middle of the night just to connect to online resources. She had to cross one of the most dangerous borders in the world to take the SAT in Pakistan. There's so many stories like this, and we can get into them that are in the book. But still, in many ways, a lot of her journey hinged on luck. She was fortunate to come from a family that was educated. She was fortunate to have access to the internet. And I think that what that indicates is even someone who has some small advantages over other girls and women in Afghanistan still had to face so many obstacles to get out. And that was in a time when the Taliban had not taken over the entire country. And so that should really hopefully make people realize just how difficult it now is for girls in Afghanistan today to access any kind of education or have any kind of hope for a pathway out.
Okay, now for me, I love all people. I don't care what religion you are, if you're a Muslim, if you're a Christian, whatever. But I'm also an educated man, where I've studied the Quran, I studied all the Bible and all these things, and I believe that people are people. No matter where you come from, we all have the same needs. We want to be loved. We want to be cared about. We want to be protected. We want to be fed, and we want to be educated. But for some reason, it seems like in certain countries, somebody will take an idea, they'll take it for something, one phrase, and they'll take it to the total extreme. And I think a lot of that, that has to with the Taliban. It's kind of like they took something good and then they kind of made it their own thing to make it bad. So, and I'm sure, your mom and dad, sweet people, loving, caring people, and then just looking out their door and you're like, what is my country? What has this become? So, and I'm sure you've talked to them many times. So, what was their reactions when they're looking out the doors and they're like, this isn't the country I grew up in? So what was that like?
I think for my mother especially a lot, because often she would all the time, I think she would talk about Afghanistan that she grew up in. And for me, it felt really was like a fairy tale. She would tell us like, oh, we would like go to this school, or just like she would say like, we had friends who would bike to the school, and that's like in Kandahar. And like I just felt like my mom is telling me the story of a different country, or like she would tell us the time when she was in dorm and like all of the stories, going to concerts. And it's just I think it's a lot like she was in some sense still like living in the past of Afghanistan, and this new Afghanistan, as I said, was like a stranger to her. And I think that's a lot of people are like that they are like, yeah, they don't recognize that what the country has become. And
yeah, and conversely, I think in the United States, having grown up here, I think that we often just have this very truncated understanding of Afghanistan and Afghan history. And when we've traveled and talked about the book, people are very surprised to hear stories of Sola's mother being a university student and then a university professor. They're surprised to learn that at one time Afghanistan was a tourist destination, that it was a site of business competition between Soviets and Americans. There was a time when things were so different. And so then a real purpose of this book became to share that history as well, which is why it's not just Sola's life story. We actually start the book with the stories of, Sola's father getting a degree in Kabul, Sola's mother leaving home and kind of coming into the world as her own woman. And I think also when that history gets described, then the loss that came with this, first with the Afghan civil war and then with the Taliban takeover in the late 90s, that loss is felt far more deeply, because there's not really a sense of inevitability to it. There could have been another Afghanistan, and there are people today, who still very clearly remember that other Afghanistan. And that's also important now when, the media attention has turned away from what's happening in the country. And I think it's very easy, especially in the United States, we feel tired of talking about this place that's so far from home. And it's easy to just say, this is how these people are, or this is how this place has always been. But it's important to realize that even a few decades ago, that's not how it was.
And like I said, I'm a veteran, 23 years, and I don't like to bring it up, but there's a lot of Afghani soldiers that gave their lives to try to help the people Afghan. And a lot of people don't realize that, the American soldier, if it wasn't for the Afghani soldiers, we wouldn't have been there. We wouldn't be able to come home. So I want to give some love to the Afghan people and also the soldiers that were there and the police forces, because they did the best that they can do. So I just wanted to say that for me as a veteran, I appreciate the not only the people but also the police officers and also the soldiers that lost their life trying to get freedom for you guys. So I just wanted to say that. But now talk to us, because as a teacher, as your parents, teachers, what is it like to not be able to, like, your mother was a professor, and then all of a sudden, okay, well now she can't teach in schools anymore. So, and then your father is a professor or teaching education, but he's not able to teach women like his own daughter. So I'm sure that had to take that had to take a toll on your parents, right?
Yeah, my father was actually a businessman. It's only my mother. And yeah, I think it had a lot of emotional impact on my mother to be able to have a life of her own outside home and then not have it, and then see her own kids growing up, not going to school, uneducated. And so, like, for me, when I was 14, that's when I started learning, because I had so many questions. I was forced to stop going to school when I was 11. And I just, like, the world around me was, kind of hard. There was a lot of war going on. So I began to question so many, why, what's the purpose of my life? Why, it's the things, just because I'm a woman, I can't do the logic just failed to convince me. And so it was that time. I was also seeing my brothers thriving academically, and I felt really jealous of their lives and that they had a purpose and meaning. And so I was fortunate to have a grandfather who was self-taught at the time, early 50s or even back than that. And so that's when I realized that, oh, maybe I can also be a self-taught. And so I started learning English. And initially, I did not even know, very basic, other than hi, how are you? And so I would watch for hours and hours of BBC or CNN, and only to understand a word or two. But that was enough to see oh, I can do it. And then when I was so that's how I started my education journey. And then when I was 16, I was still learning English, but it's all from the news. And I would just wanted to something out, see something beyond news, just to read normal things. And so, but in Kandahar, there weren't that many English learning resources. And so my brother was going to Pakistan, and I asked him, just bring me anything that's in English, but it's not about war and violence. And so he brought back to me this Time magazine, and I learned about Khan Academy. And immediately, when I was reading through the pages, I just felt this is what I needed. And I did not, at that time, I did not know how to add and subtract, and I was 16 years old. And so, but I went and opened up Khan Academy, which is an online learning resources. And the first thing I saw was algebra. And I knew from my brothers and cousins conversation, algebra is really hard. And I just felt oh, maybe it's too hard for me. But then I went to ask my brother, what comes after addition and subtraction, because that's all I thought I knew at school of when I was going to school. And so he told me fractions, and I saw fractions there. But I also realized that I didn't really know my addition subtraction. So I went back to study that. And so in 3 years, I was obsessed with learning. And that's when I went from not knowing how to add and subtract to study a college level calculus and physics. And then just the learning became the meaning of my life, and the purpose that I woke up to every day.
But now, okay, let's go back, because we're looking at 2007, 2008. A lot of stuff is still going on over there, and I'm sure you didn't have the great internet like we have today, where you just click on and you're on the internet. I'm sure it wasn't easy, and I'm sure there wasn't a lot of it was how should I say, they watch what you watch, and you couldn't exactly just go on every website. So what was that like in the early days of just getting some kind of internet? What was that like?
So fortunately, internet in Afghanistan is not censored. No, it's not censored because I think you need like a more sophisticated tools to do that. So fortunately, that was not the case. But yeah, initially I had to use this slow dial-up connection that would take, I don't know, sometimes half an hour to like connect, or like the lines would be not working properly. So that was a huge challenge. Like I would like open up my laptop in the middle of the night and just like let the download start. And so it was a very, very painful and slow process. But I think just for me, I felt like I was drowning, and it was just like a place to hold on to and like still like try to get my head out of it. So it wasn't like, oh, like, let's, things are easy, okay, let me just do it. It was like, even if it was getting harder, I was becoming determined that I will do it.
Yeah,
So
something we also read a lot about in the book is that idea of identity and how closely education can become tied to identity in a place where women, are first, as girls, often defined by who their father is, and then later on, in Kandahar, girls are married as early as 16 or even earlier than that. They become defined by their husband and their husband's family. And really, we write in the book about how Sola was grappling with seeing that future for herself, but then to be open, no matter how difficult that process is, to be open to a world of BBC News, of math and fractions, and then calculus and physics. That really opens up so many new ways to define yourself, so many new sets of knowledge and lenses through which to see the world. And I think that's something that can be hard to understand from an American or Western framework, where, as you said, these things are all at the tip of our fingers. But it's just so different when life is so restricted.
So, and I totally agree. And I know this, for me, this is the greatest country in the world. You can be anything you want to be as long as you put in the work and put the effort in, and to realize how good we have it here. I mean, I've known many friends that come back from Afghanistan, Pakistan, and they're like, I can go to the store right now and buy something to eat. But in other countries, there's kids, drinking out of dirty moats, just don't have the things that we have. Even the poorest person in America sometimes can have more than almost the richest person in Afghanistan and Pakistan. So I think we really got it great here. But I wanted to ask, because for me, I'm addicted to knowledge. I mean, I'm 55 years old and I've read over 6,000 books, and I have 18 going right now. Why, I don't know. But what drew you to math? What was, because, you could have went to English, you could have chose history studies. What drew you to math? Was it just, here's a problem, let me solve it?
Yeah, I think for me, it really was the order. It's like so orderly, like I think it's like such a clear one that I've been thinking about. One is that it's just, you enter just different like headspace. It's like there was so much like war, everything, but like math, it's just like it's a just different space, and you build it's only in relation to one another. Like fractions, then you can move ahead to like the next thing, and then so I think that was like just the order, and just and it's really is like you're constructing something in your head, like you're building something in your head. It's so I think just that the way that math works really was. And it's also, I had so many questions about I had like those questions like, okay, where the meaning of life, what's our existence, and it all goes back to like why the world exists, why even like the universe exists and how it exists. And so also I started like studying physics and cosmology, and so also to be able to do that, you also have to know more math. So it also was also a motivation that I will be able to the more math I know, the more I can study physics. And
I don't know. Sorry, go ahead. I was just going to say, I don't know, Sola, if you mentioned, but now in the United States, Sola is a quantum computing researcher at Tufts University. So it's really an amazing journey.
Another great school, and I definitely want to talk about that. But when my kids were in college, well, I got two kids in college. One's a freshman, and one's a senior. And when they were going to high school, I would just take them to the SAT, drop them off for a couple hours, go pick them up, and they come back home. That wasn't the case with you, was it? Tell us about your journey with the SAT, because that's what that's one of my favorite part of your book, because I have it and I've read it now. I'm on my third time reading it, but that's one of my favorite parts, because you were so headstrong. You're like, I'm going to do this, whether there's so many different ways I'm going to do this, but I'm going to find a way to do this. And I think just your courage and your strength really inspired me. So I just wanted to say that. So talk about, like I said, here in the United States, you can take the SAT every Saturday for forever. So what was it like for you going to take your SAT?
Yeah, I mean, it was like before I took the SAT, I did not even know that exists. I looked, I was studying I was learning, but after a few years, I realized, I can't just be in my own room and just all my life be like self-learning. I have to get out and study university and become really part of the world. And so initially, I looked to take an exam in Afghanistan just to say that, to show my proficiency. But when I went to the education ministry, they didn't even look me in the eyes and said, well, we're not gonna we're not giving that exam to you to take it. And so then the next step was can I, then I started looking at if there are ways for me to take more international exam. And so I came across the GET, and I didn't have the books to learn from, to prepare for it. So I asked my sister, and she sent me from the UK. It took a few months, but finally the books arrived to learn from it. And I spent a few months studying those books, but when I looked to register for that exam, that was also not available in Afghanistan or not even the neighboring country, Pakistan. And so then the next step was really the SAT, and it was so many, I didn't have a passport, and then it was also not available in Afghanistan. It was only available in Pakistan. And so it just every step that I took, it just felt like this world of problem emerged.
Yeah, and in the book we write about how crossing into Pakistan is so different from how we think about border crossings in the US. I was just looking at footage of that border. It's one of the most dangerous borders in the world. It's a border where people are often beaten with electric cables, where men and women have to cross separately, where you have to take multiple vehicles just to get across. And that's what Sola had to go through just to get into Pakistan. And then in the book, we write about how there weren't any spots left to take the SAT, and she managed to get the last spot at a testing center in Karachi, Pakistan. That's all she had to go through just to sit in that chair. And then that exam ended up determining the trajectory of the rest of her life. So like you said, Richard, it's so different from the way we think about the SAT in the US.
Yeah, and especially with that, the border between the two countries, there's back then, because 2008, 2009, there was still a lot of IEDs, there was still a lot of stuff going on, especially between the two countries. So you really put your life in danger. So now take me back, because sometimes we want to get to a place, but sometimes when we get to that place and you finally sat in the chair, what was that feeling like? And then were you like, oh my God, I'm here. Now what? I got to really crush this thing. So what was that experience like when you actually got the chair and you're sitting there waiting for the test to begin? What was going through your head?
Yeah, so the timeline is that it was 2015,
Okay.
and so I don't think I was just so happy because I just never knew. I didn't think even like 15 days before the exam was that I would take it. Like I didn't know that I will take it because like I was on a waiting list, and I think just like sitting there was just like, oh, like this is like the problems that was before me was like dissolved. And so yeah, I really don't remember. I just like was happy to take that exam. I think that I was so happy. Like everyone was so anxious. It's like, oh, how, what's, and so, but for me, I was just like, at least then I would not look at myself like, oh, I didn't do it. Me, I don't know. It was really hard to think of the future. About what if I like don't like pass the exam? What will happen? Then that's gonna be like, oh, um, I'm not I'm not capable of it. So of course that thing was there, but at least this was like the first thing that, okay, I have done that part.
Okay, but now the person that took the test is not the same person that first got there. So when you
Exactly.
got up and you left, you were not the same person that got there. So, what it was like getting home, waiting on the results, and because now all of a sudden your mind's like, okay, now if I pass this thing, what do I do? Where do I go? Where's my future? So you were two totally different people within a day, right?
Yeah, I do think it's like a milestone that you pass, and you like by the end of it you're a different person, like something changes. But of course, but I was also thinking about the next exam because I had to take the English test, which is the IELTS, and that's also like a big exam. It's like 2 days, and it was like just I think a few weeks apart. And but like yeah, I think I heard but I was really thinking about what if I like did the wrong bubbles, because this was my first time taking an exam, and it was this long hours of exam, and it's not in my own native language, no matter how much I learn English, but still like it's a foreign language to me. And so I think there was so much, like there was a lot of anxieties of what if I have like filled the wrong bubbles. I was, because with my math, some of my math questions I was confident because I have practiced it, I practiced SAT like past tests. So but there was still this anxieties of what if I like fill the wrong bubbles, and what if I just like not pass it because of that, and that was my only chance.
So what was your score?
I don't remember the specifics, but it was I passed it so that I can like apply to universities in the US. And so I think that once I heard that like the score, I just felt like there's this, like you feel elevated. Um,
So okay, so now you passed the second test, and obviously you apply to certain schools. But again, if you want to be successful in life, you have to get comfortable being uncomfortable. And I'm sure just going to a whole other country, having, the way we live, it's totally different. And unfortunately, there's even till today, there's still a bias where, hey, if I talk to somebody, hey, where are you from? Oh, I'm from Pakistan, or I'm from Afghanistan. There's some people out there, they still give you that, they give you that look, and you're like, I'm my own person. I'm a good person. So what was it like coming to America, and how did that all come to fruition? Coming to America, did you come by yourself?
Yeah, so I think coming to America was also not that easy. Just like I took the test, I passed, I accepted to universities, and then I was here in the US. The next step, I think the really hardest part was to get the US visa. And even though I was accepted to university, my visa, and with my mother, I flew to Kabul, and within 1 minute, my visa was rejected because the officer told me like, oh, I don't think you're going there to study, you're just going there to immigrate. And for me, that was the really the first time I saw how the world sees Afghans, and it really like broke something in me. It was this really my, you know, this was the step that was not really in my hands. You know, no matter, I did all the things that were in my hands, and this was, I couldn't just like, and I did ask why, and that's what was his answer. And so, but like, you know, luckily that also, there was like, of course, a lot again like challenges, but I overcame and I came to the US. But for me, luckily, the people that I have surrounded myself have been really, really supportive. And yeah, so, you know, of course, just coming to another country, it does have a lot of sets of challenges. And I think just being born in Afghan at the time, it's like I've seen my family, and also like Afghanistan, being in Afghanistan, life is so uncertain. So like in comparison to that, really the challenges that I faced here I didn't feel like it was something that I should be thinking too much about it.
Yeah, in the book, if I can just add, a couple of things. The first is, I think that story about the visa and that just immediate rejection, even when she had those college acceptance letters, it points to the fact that at the end of the day, sometimes it's just these governments and these large institutions of power that ultimately block people from getting out, girls and women from getting out. And now, as we've been touring the book, so many people ask us, you know, what can we do to support Afghan women or Afghan girls? And of course, you know, keeping these stories in the headlines, continuing to shine light on what's happening in Afghanistan is important. But at the end of the day, if a girl can go from not even being able to add and subtract to doing college level calculus, but still be turned away in 5 seconds by a visa official, you know, those are things that require real institutional change. And that's something that's so difficult to achieve just as one person. And then the second thing I would add is, also while we were working on this book and going through drafts, we spent a lot of time trying to describe that transition to the United States, and what it was like to get off the plane. And it's interesting because the stories we ended up telling in the book, of course, there's a shock when you land in America, and there's things that just don't exist in Afghanistan. But some of the stories took me by surprise. For example, in the book we write about how Sola landed in the United States, and then she had a friend she had met online actually come and pick her up, a young woman named Emily. And Emily greeted her at the airport and then said, come on, get in the car. And Sola just paused for a moment because she had never seen a woman drive. And then, her friend gets in the driver's seat. Then she gets in the passenger seat for the first time, seeing the world through the dash, through that big window in the front. And that in many ways was very symbolic of the kind of cultural and geographic transformation, but it might not be the first story that people would think of.
And I think that's amazing because, we all, even like if I go to other countries, sometimes you're just like, you feel like you're in a whole other world. It's not like it's just, it's like, so sometimes when you do that, and then you're like, am I supposed to be doing this? I feel dirty. I feel naughty because I don't know if I'm like when I went to England, I was driving on the wrong side of the road compared to here. And I was just like, I guess this is what I'm supposed to do. So how long did it take you to get not only used to, the way we do things here, but also the food options are probably a lot different than they were when you were home. So what was that like? You're passing McDonald's, Burger King, Taco Bell, and you're like, this is great. So what was that like?
No, I think it was the opposite. Like it took me a long time. I don't think I don't eat like fast food. Like I still eat my like Afghan food, or like, I'm also like Indian food. So whenever I go out, like, well, where is the Indian restaurant here? Because Indian food is similar to Afghan food. So I think, in some ways, I think I stayed like really, really Afghan in that way. It's like, I still like my rice and my korma and like my things. So.
Okay, so talk to us about your first day at school, because I think sometimes if we've been through struggles, like for me, 5 years ago I lost 80% of my vision, and I'm still doing this. I'm still podcasting, writing books, speaking. So when somebody says to me, I can't do something, it drives me crazy, because I'm like, listen, you can do whatever you want to do if you put your mind and you hustle and you grind. So what was that like to know, when you're sitting in that chair? Obviously, you have a lot of gratitude when you're sitting there, because you're like, I can't believe I even made it this far. But then you see people that take it for granted in the next chair over. So what was that like? Was that something that you really thought, that you ever thought about?
Yeah, I think like for me, one of the thing is like how one thing that I've like a vivid story about it is that I was in it was not in school, but it was in like in a restaurant, and like for me, I was admiring like the outside view. It was such a calm day, like sunny day, and I was just like so happy to be on the street and like this. And then like went to this restaurant, and this was like a family-run restaurant, so things were slow. And then this guy, and I was also talking to my family, I was on the phone, and they were telling me like, oh, like this bomb like exploded. So I was just like, for me, my contrast was really being me on this calm street, and then my family in Kandahar, like all these things happening, and this guy just like he ordered a sandwich, and he was like, it was taking 45 minutes, and then he just like starts screaming, and it's like, oh, like this like sandwich, why is like he take 45 minutes and things like that. So I think for me, a lot of it really is the way, like it's just really like the perceptions of I'm on the street, I see it really differently, or like some of my friends, or like some of those people, the way their reaction to things. So I think it does come from the way I compare things is different than the way other people compare. And also I think about learning is that I think I saw the way I learn, it's something more sacred. And I think education in general, it's not about the students, but it feels like a little bit more like transactional. And it isn't, I felt like my education is like because of my grandfather. And then it's about, yeah, it's a direct connection to the world, or in some ways, and feels more like in exams, you take the exam and then you take it's like that's also my problem was in university. Like I didn't I just had this very different view of education, because I was reading books like Plato, or like that Republic, and I just felt like this is how people are going to be. They're just going to be like all the time debating, like what's a good law, what's justice, what's this. Which is of course my own problem, because I was not realistically looking into the world. So yeah, I think that's just the way I had shaped things in my head, and the way things were.
Okay, so now also I realize that once you start trying to get ahead in life, whether that's financially, educationally, some of the people that you grow up with or you knew, they're like, oh, you think you're better than me? You think you're smarter than me? It's like, no, I just want more out of this life. I want to have a better life. I want to be more educated. I want to do more things. So did you ever come across any of that with people that you grew up with? Because now all of a sudden you're at Tufts and you're taking these high-level courses and you're crushing it, and you're going to crush it in business when you get out of school. So, what was that like?
I do, yeah,
Your
yeah,
family is
my family is very educated, and they themselves are like going masters and doctors. So the education level is like high, and it feels normal.
I think also the way we write about it in the book, women like growing up in Afghanistan, you don't really have that much interaction with society beyond your own immediate family anyway, right? So
Yeah, exactly.
there may be people who have that perception of women, and there are, so many people who have that perception of women and girls who go abroad or seek an education, but you probably wouldn't have been you only interacted with a handful of people in a given year. So yeah, it's probably those people do exist though.
Okay, so I wrote a book and it's hit number one twice, and I got a new book coming out.
Wow.
So talk to me about what was the impetus for writing this book? And for me, when I wrote my book, it was very cathartic, but it opened a lot of wounds that I had to heal. So, what was the thought process in writing a book? Because a lot of people would think, especially if you're like me and you struggle with imposter syndrome, you're like, why am I going to write a book? Who's even going to read it except for maybe a cousin or my mom and dad? So what was your thought process on even starting to write a book?
So I think for me it was that Afghanistan, I was living in Afghanistan, and then I got out of it, and I began to see how the Afghanistan that I knew, that the one I lived, was completely different than the one that was the new coverage was showing. Yes, of course, there was bomb exploding, there was this thing, but that was not the only thing in life there. There was so much complexity, and again, like, it's just like you just only focus in one period of time. I have known stories of my family, so like Afghanistan is so like complex, and in one sentence is you like Afghan mind is like crowded place. Like in one sentence like in this one period of time you talk about communism, you talk about Muslim Brotherhood, you talk about democracy. Like, it's just so many things happen in this brief time, and it's, of course, the way people interact and that change. So there's so much complexity in life, but at the same time, there's so much beauty as well in life. We would, there's like, we talk about like fashion, like Bollywood movies and songs and dances. And so how do you tell the story of a country that's not just one thing? So for me, it really was to show like Afghanistan in its full self, like not just this one thing.
And by the way, I love the food, by the way. I love the food. So I just wanted to say that whenever I get a chance to go to my friend's place, I always like, all right, hook me up. You know what I want. So he makes it. So I just want to say the food is awesome. And it's all fresh. There's not a lot of processed foods there, because everything pretty much is freshly grown. So I just wanted to say that. I'm sorry. Go ahead, man.
Oh, no, I was just going to add too that we started this book writing process in 2020. So initially this book was just going to be Sola's inspiring story. And of course, that's a story that comes with a lot of challenges, but it was going to end with her coming to the United States, and living this life. But then, of course, the Taliban took over the country in 2021. And I think the story took on a real urgency for both of us, because now it also became about telling the world through a deeply emotional, deeply personal story, what life was like for Sola, and how that represents the life now that millions of Afghan girls are facing. Right now, the Taliban in the last 2.5 years has instituted over 75 edicts directly against women, edicts that ban girls from school, ban women from the workplace, that really seek to erase the female identity from public life in Afghanistan. And that's something that might be difficult to understand very abstractly, even if people know that in some way. But our hope was, through sharing Sola's story, hopefully you can, as a reader, empathize with her sisters, with her mother who had to watch her children grow up uneducated, and then think about the immensity of what's happening in Afghanistan today, because it's Sola's story multiplied by more than 1 million.
All right, because I have a lot of friends served over there, and they thought, they're doing the right thing. They're helping others. They're changing lives. And then after the whole debacle with the Afghanistan pullout, everybody I knew that served over there were like, we're going back in time, and it's going to get worse now. So, and a lot of guys here and girls actually committed suicide because they felt they failed the Afghani people when we pulled out. So, what is life like now today? And I think today's on Wednesday. So what is it like now for the young ladies and the women in Afghanistan today as we speak?
Yeah, I can start, and then I know Sola has even stories from family that's still there. But so girls are banned from education after the 6th grade, and in some places even earlier. And girls and women are not allowed to leave the home without a male guardian. They basically can't exist outside the home. And I think the real tragedy too is initially there were a lot of conversations about how, oh, maybe this Taliban is different. Maybe they're a Taliban 2.0 that's going to somehow give rights to women and wants legitimacy on the world stage. But it was only after the world's attention turned away from what was happening in the country that you just saw this systematic regression in women's rights. Literally a new edict every week or every other week that bans women from beauty salons, from calling into radio programs, from workplaces and NGOs. And so, millions of human rights abuses are taking place every day against the girls of Afghanistan, and it's an incredibly dire situation.
So now, and I wrote this down. I wrote it down, but it's not the way I meant to write it down. But so now, women and girls in Afghanistan, they're pretty much just exist in their mind, in the Taliban's mind, just to have children and to serve men. There's no other reason for women in their mindset. Am I right? Or is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, I mean, I think they've been given speeches that really, they say that that should be the purpose of women, and they really even give example of their own grandmothers or mothers, like what was wrong with them. So
yeah, and I think
I'm sorry,
to think about it too, think how much energy it takes every day for the Taliban to wake up and have to reduce all the women in that country just to being daughters or mothers or what, this very singular definition. It takes a tremendous amount of energy because, of course, women and girls are so much more than that. But the tragedy is that no one in the world is responding to this crisis with any level of energy that's close to what it takes to repress those women. And so there's a real urgency for that kind of energy and momentum from our side as well.
But now, it's just something I'm thinking about because my mom is like 4'0". She's an Italian old lady now, and even if I talk back to my mother, I'm going to get slapped, or she's going to yell at me, and I feel like I'm going to be punished. So, all these men in the Taliban, they were once children. They were once little boys. So how did this, I mean, obviously we don't have that much time, but, how do these people become this way? I mean, do they treat their own mothers this way?
So I think it's important, like I've been thinking about that too, is that they didn't grow up the way we, like in a normal family. Like they are, first of all, they're also children of people who were fighters before, or also they they grew up in poverty, and so from very young childhood they were separate. They went to like the madrasa or places like that, so they really didn't see like a loving family environment, a nurturing environment where they see the human values and things like a normal society would value. So they were really kind of were raised to be fighters and raised to have no kindness or anything like that. So I think it's important to see that. Then I think it makes sense for them because they themselves have no love in their life to respect. Or
so now when you go out and your book is out and you talk to women, and some of them might have cousins or family members still in Afghanistan, and I know when you talk to them, because there's something when you're talking on a stage, that's one thing, but when you're talking to somebody face to face and you're telling your story, and you could see their eyes well up, you could see their eyes, they start to cry because you're like, oh my God, this is still happening. And like you said earlier, I believe that once we took off in that plane, when the Afghanistan pull out, I think everybody was like, all right, we're done. that country doesn't exist to us anymore. It's kind of like Syria. It's kind of like, all right, we're done with it. We move on. So, what is it like talking to young women or even men? Because a lot of men still probably have relatives in Afghanistan. What do they say when they read your book, and what are their thoughts?
So I have my own relatives in Afghanistan. Like I have my cousins and their daughters, and I've been like talking to them, and it's extremely. I see first, it's those young girls, like they want to go to school, but the schools are, and then they just like tell me stories. They're very young, but they're young, but they have such a like deep words because of like the pain that has been inflicted on them, and then they have to like express. They say like our we feel like my feet are tied, and I feel like a bird with broken wings. I'm a wounded bird, or things like that. So I think it's extremely painful to hear it and talk to it, and then I see so much of my own young self in them, because I was once a girl in Afghanistan, in Kandahar, and I couldn't go to school, and also like now I can do what, like I'm doing everything that I want, like I'm intellectually thriving, and so I just feel like there's sadness into the things that I do. There's also sadness and happiness because I'm able to achieve those things, but sadness is that there's so many like me that's there, and they can just surpass me in so many ways, but yet they will never be able to see what they're capable of. They see their potential. I think it's not even like, it's in my own self. I have that, and then a lot of times I ask myself, like, what would my life be if I was in Afghanistan right now, and how much of the things that I'm able to do is because of me. It's so much is because of the environment that provides.
Okay, now, so we pulled out of Afghanistan, and I don't care which people are political. I think it was just BS. But we pull out, and all of a sudden, Taliban triples down on what they're doing, and now all of a sudden, it's just. And I try not to curse on the show, but I can't help it. But it's just a shit show over there. I mean, it's just. So how hard is it for somebody to get out of Afghanistan now, compared to when you first got out?
I mean, it's almost impossible. First of all, there is no embassy. There is, like, as a student, first of all, no school exists. Then, I think it's just every step is extremely hard. And then even if you have family support, everything, like just getting in this, because all the embassies, not the US embassy, just all, there's no, like, really, the world doesn't have any relationship really with Afghanistan. So even like getting a visa to Pakistan is kind of like near impossible. Getting visa to Iran is near impossible. So I think it's an extremely dire and situation, and I think that's how I see it. But I think there are still young women, and I have friends who are running underground schools, and there's still students trying to go there. So I think that's like should be a motivation for the world to help back, like not just to see the despair, but also to see how people are still willing to take the risk, how people are still like trying to improve their lives and help those people to have a larger impact.
So if you guys, both of you guys, can talk to the world and say, what would you say to people, to the average person? Because I think that the average person, one person can save a million lives, because we all have a voice. But if we all put our voices out there and come together, we can make a change. So what would you say to the American people that are going to watch this? And I'm going to push this out. I'm actually going to do some Facebook ads. I'm going to push this out because I think it needs to be told. But what would both of you say to the American people right now, not only about your book, but about your mission? What is your mission, and how are you going to go about making that mission happen?
I mean, I think the most central goal for us is to continue to shine light on what's happening to women and girls in Afghanistan. Because, as you mentioned, there actually is, and I've been thinking about this a lot, there's so much power when the world starts to pay attention, when women in the United States or in other Western countries start to identify with what's happening in Afghanistan and see that this is happening to other women in the world. And when people start to raise their voices and call on governments and companies and other large institutions to start to make meaningful change and create pathways out for Afghan women, to invest in online learning solutions for those women who do have access to the internet, to pursue the more creative solutions that require money and time and investment. But the only way I think for that to happen is if we continue to pay attention to what's happening in the country. And that means keeping Afghanistan in the news longer than it has been. Initially, those first couple of edicts against women, those were front page stories. Those happen every couple of days now, and it doesn't even make the news. And so it's really imperative that we just don't turn away from these stories.
Sola, in your opinions?
Yeah, I think the same, similarly, that Taliban, every day they wake up and they find one more ways to oppress Afghan women. And are we thinking, are we even putting a fraction of the energy to help back? I don't think so. I think there are people, as Malaina said, it's just, people just want to move away from it. And the important thing is to not move away and not just talk about it, but also come together and find ways and help back. And also I think it's a lot of Afghan women, when you talk to them, they does say just don't normalize what's happening, just, it's like an Afghan thing, just let's move on to something, let's be this is a crime that's happening, and talk about it in that way.
So now, but in America, I'm in New Jersey, and there's a big Pakistan, Afghanistan, Afghani populations that live in New Jersey or around the whole country. So what happens when you go talk to these people and talk about your book? What are their thoughts, and how are you guys raising money through the book sales, or what are you guys actually doing to make a difference besides, like I said, because for me, I can talk all day about helping somebody, but a portion of my books always go to help somebody else. So I'm paying it forward. So what about you guys? When you go to a dinner with a bunch of Afghanis or Pakistanis, what are they saying, and what are their thoughts? Are they really getting behind you?
I would say people feel the story very deeply. People from Afghanistan, but also people from countries like Iran or Pakistan or India, who have some sort of similar experience in their own history or their family's history. And they are, and then not just people from that part of the world, people who hear Sola's personal story really identify with it and feel strongly about what's happening in Afghanistan. In terms of what we're doing specifically now, I would say, first of all, just the fact that Sola was able to tell her story is an incredibly brave act in and of itself. We had to, especially after 2021, we had to put so much effort into preserving the safety of her family. And it was not a decision that came without danger. And so but I think sharing, and that's why these stories are sometimes missing from the global stage as well. But so sharing that story was really the first step. Now thinking about building broader coalitions, we're working with the UN to, especially this Women's History Month, to raise awareness and bring more attention to what's happening to girls and women in Afghanistan. And also we're thinking about how do we reach young people, because it was in school, for example, that I first learned about in a very formalized way what was happening in other countries, what kinds of girls were being denied access to school, even well before I met Sola. And I think there's great power in reaching out to girls and boys who are in high school or middle school, sharing this book with them, but also just more resources about what's happening now. So we're working to build a curriculum as well that can reach, that can support teachers in teaching about this to their students and reach students across the country.
Okay, now let me, because this question, I don't know why this just hit me, but it did. So I have no filter, by the way, so I just ask whatever. I have a husband and wife that live on my block, and they're from Afghanistan, but he treats his wife like shit. She always has to walk behind him. She has to serve him. She has to be covered up, all the time. I mean, I know they go to the beach and they're covered up, and I'm like, so did you ever just see some of these women and you just want to grab them and shake them and be like, it doesn't have to be like this? Well, you can have a better life.
I think it's obviously difficult to talk about individual people here or there. But I think also something that we write about in the book is the fact that Sola's rebellion was through education. And she was fortunate that that rebellion actually did lead to a way out. But every day in Afghanistan, during the time the book was written, and now more so, their women and girls have their own acts of rebellion every day. And we really wanted to reject through this book any notion that women are passive or victims, because we write about women stealing money from their husbands or escaping out of the house when they're not home. There's so many acts like that, or lying about their daughter's age just so their husbands will let them go to school for 1 year longer. Those acts of rebellion happen every day, and so that was also a really central theme of the book.
And that's why I love the title, by the way. Because it's a dichotomy, defiant dreams. It's total. It's it's both ends of the spectrum in one title. And I love the title of the book. So what do you guys got going on now? Are you doing any book signings? What do you guys have coming up in the next couple months?
We're not traveling right now, but we're continuing to promote the book, especially around Women's History Month and beyond. And then the paperback will come out in May of 2024. And we're also continuing our work with the UN and building curriculum. So
how do we get in touch with you? How do we support the mission? How do we get Defiant Dreams? How do we get in touch with you guys?
Sure. So the book is called Defiant Dreams, The Journey of an Afghan Girl Who Risked Everything for Education. And it's available everywhere books are sold. And for more information on the book and about the other advocacy that we're working on, you can go to defiantdreams.com. And then for social media, I'm at Malaina Kapoor on Instagram and Twitter, and then Sola.
Yeah, on Instagram, I'm at Sola Mahfouz, and on Twitter, you can just search Sola Mahfouz and it will come up.
And by the way, I'm following you guys everywhere. So I started following you on all your social media. I just wanted to let you know that. So, and I want to thank Madison. Without you, we wouldn't be together. So I just want to say thank you so much. And ladies, I just want to say thank you. I'm so grateful that we finally got a chance to do this, especially during Women's History Month. And I think you both are trailblazers, and I think you guys are going to change the world for a better place. And I'm thankful that we got to hang out today, and hope I learned a few things, and I can't wait to get this book out and to be able to help as many people as I can personally help.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having us.
It's my honor. And guys, just remember, vertical momentum, the only way to go is butt up. Guys, if you don't know Madison, I'm going to give you the information. If you want to get on podcasts, person to go to. So I just want to say thank both of you and have an amazing week and keep crushing it. And I can't wait to get the paperback. I like paperbacks. I'm the kind of guy I like to fold over. I like to write in books. So I want to be the first person. I want an autographed copy of your book. So I want to be the first person to actually order the paperback. So have a great week, guys, and take care of yourself and stay strong. And you guys are changing the world one person at a time.
Thank you.
Have a great week.
You too. Bye.